वाला गिम्बल होगा उसको दीजिए, मैं वाइस सेट कर देता हूँ। आपका वाइस सेट कर दिया जाएगा। एक छोटा पाउच होगा। साइट रेडी है, तो बस उसको थोड़ा सा पेजेस वगैरह करके अप करना था, भागा थोड़ी बस कर देगा।
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first session for today. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Zisis, who is the Head of Laboratory Services and Biobanking at the International Agency for Research on Cancer, a part of the WHO. He oversees one of the largest international biorepositories supporting global cancer research and prevention efforts. Dr. Zisis holds PhD from the Imperial College London and has completed his MBA from Cass Business School. His career spans key roles in viral diagnostics, biobanking, and healthcare innovation. He was previously the president of the International Society and has contributed to the international standards in biobanking. Dr. Zisis is also the editor-in-chief of Innovations in Digital Health, Diagnostics and Biomarkers, and serves as a visiting faculty member at different institutions worldwide. His work continues to shape global research infrastructure, ensuring high-quality biospecimen management for improved public health outcomes. It's a pleasure to have him here with us today. I now welcome Dr. Zisis to please join us.
Good. Thank you very much. I have to say thank you for all the medication for yesterday. It really made a difference this morning. What we're going to talk today is about digitalization of healthcare research and biobanking. This is a very, very increasing trend that we see in the field of biobanking. But before that, if you could indulge me, I'll tell you how, because I'm Greek, how is the first interaction that Greece has ever had with India. So around 550 BC, the Persian Empire wanted to send some embassies to Athens so that Athens becomes a separate state of Persia. So part of the ambassadorial gift was the peacock that came from India, which was in turn an ambassadorial gift from India to the Persian Empire. So as any good Greek, what we did, we started a state-run farm to farm the peacocks and use them as ambassadorial gifts to everywhere else. And that's how peacock was introduced into Europe. It's become an ambassadorial gift. And that's when you go to the Roman Empire later, it became a symbol of the emperor because it was always part of the official offering and gift from an old civilization with a lot of knowledge to a younger civilization. So that's the story, and in our written history from about 2,500 years ago, that's how we came to know about India. Right, a bit more recent. So I'll give you a couple of slides about IARC and how we fit within the World Health Organization environment. Then the current trends that we see, some examples of how we incorporate that in our work, and a few words about the regulatory landscape. So can you see? Because I think with the light it might be a little bit faint up there. Is it? Can you read the text? Yeah, okay. Right. So IARC is not a new agency when it comes to WHO. It was created about 60 years ago, so this is our 60th year anniversary. And it had always a focus on cancer. So we perform the research with three preconditions. First, it has to be interdisciplinary. Second, it will always have to include LMICs, low middle income countries. And third, it has to be intended for public health, for guidelines for decision making, as a decision making tool. So it's not really discovery is always enticing from a research perspective, but it may not always be interesting for WHO because it has to lead to a guideline at some point. So what we do, this is our regular day-to-day job. We produce the classification of tumors. This is now in the 5th edition. It's the first time that it's been online. And it's also the first time that we've had genomic data incorporated into the classification. And as I go in different places around the world, I have different opinions to the usefulness of the genomic data, of the applicability. But what we do is, of course, we have a lot more genomic data than what we have incorporated. Our hesitation to include the full spectrum of the genomic data is that we feel it's not always inclusive of all the different regions of the world in terms of information. And that's a big gap in our knowledge when it comes to India, even in the classification. The second day-to-day job is the classification of substances. So we have a dedicated unit to do these monographs. And these are driven usually by member states. They ask us for specific substances to classify the relative carcinogenicity. So, for example, last year we had aspartame, the artificial sweetener that was classified. Talc was reclassified. So it can vary from an occupational condition. For example, firefighting was classified as 2A. The inhalation of smoke eventually leads to lung cancer, and there is now sufficient evidence to support this. But also it can be industrial products like benzene and benzene derivatives. And thirdly is we produce a lot of technical publications. So these are intended to be SOPs that you can download. All these things are open access, they're free. You can download them, you adapt them to your local context, and then you use them as a starting point to develop your operations. And again, it can range from biobanking to nuclear disasters and thyroid monitoring. The portfolio is quite varied. As a group, we have 3 main tasks. They reflect the mission of the organization to maintain a high-class laboratory service and biobank facility. We're the only laboratories and biobank within the WHO, so often we get asked to do other things. For example, COVID came and then we had to do infection, which is fine. I'm a microbiologist, I was quite happy. But we have to maintain this high class. If something happens, we have to have a ready-made facility to use. Then is to generate the data from our own research, synthesize that information for guidelines, and build the local capacity. So when I talk about biobanks, I'll talk a lot about biobank. What we mean is always the physical samples plus the digital information plus governance. So unless these 3 items are not, if these are all there, then for us it's a biobank. Otherwise, it's just a collection, and it can have a local use, but we're not really that interested in it. Our own biobank within IARC has about 6 million samples. We've used about 1/3 of those samples. A lot we keep as a reference material for the world. And on an average year, we support between 60 to 90 projects worldwide. But you can see the distribution is not even across the globe. So we have areas that are well represented and areas that are actually almost completely absent. So what type of research do we do? Generally speaking, it falls into 3 categories. One is about the infrastructure. How do you set up infrastructures? Then how do you implement guidelines in these infrastructures? And third, if you have the infrastructure and to implement the guidelines, some examples of research using those 2. So that's the lens that we're coming to. What we see as current trends in biobanking is that the user demands have expanded. So when we talk about biobanking at the moment, it's not so much the core area of receiving the samples and storing the samples for the long term, but a lot of biobanks now are expected to provide at least input in the consenting, if not do the consenting, and quite a lot of the data management and distribution. So we see there is this growing trend, and up to a point it's logical. So for example, European governments say we've invested so much money in biobanking, we expect you to provide some more services. That's fair enough. Where do we get these interaction points? So if we get this pathway of cancer, which is an oversimplification, but when the WHO report on cancer came, we had to simplify to be as broad as possible. There are three areas where we see interactions with biobanking. One is at the general population screening level, where samples are collected at scale. Then it's at the diagnosis and in the follow-up. So we know that these are the areas where we still expect to see strong growth in the next 10 years. But this growth is not evenly distributed globally. So if you look at the biobanking market as a field of activity, where we see the majority of biobanking taking place is still Europe and North America. You can see that Asia Pacific is a decent size, but if you compare to the population size that's here, it's not enough. So where do we expect to see the growth? We definitely expect to see in this part of the world. There are infrastructures being made, there is an awareness being created that will drive this growth forward. Another big area that we see supporting biobanking is the creation of national genomic projects. At IARC, we're probably involved in about half of those that you see on the screen in an advisory capacity. Probably I'll be directly involved in 5 or 7, and it's quite a few of those that are underway at the moment. And they require the provision of samples collected at scale and at regular intervals. So you need to create a facility that feeds into this national genomic project, and that creates commitment to biobanking for a longer period of time. What is really interesting is that even if the different genomic projects have a different starting point, they all tend to converge towards the middle, which is the most data-heavy area. So you can start by saying, oh, we're going to build it for the pathological genomic variation or the normal genomic variation of the population. At the end, you need all that information. And we can see that a lot of these national genomic projects underestimate the amount of data curation that needs to be involved because they come into this challenge later on where they need to combine more data into what they already have. But that's the high-level anticipation of the global trend. From day to day, it's also true that from a single sample we can do and we produce more data than ever before. So it's not only that we produce data at scale, at a global level, but we produce data at scale at a smaller level for each individual sample. If we're to quantify this, you can see that healthcare, except for retail, healthcare is the second field of human activity that has shown the highest compound aggregate growth rate increase year on year for the last 5 years. And yes, it was driven to a large extent by the pandemic. The pandemic was a catalyst for more data to be generated, but we're not going back. Maybe we took 1 or 2 steps back, but the data appetite has remained there. So how does this translate to biobanking? Well, if we see the UK Biobank, and we only use the UK Biobank because it's a very mature infrastructure, At the moment, the requests for data are about 95% of the total requests that they receive. So we go through this progression where we collect the samples, we start translating the samples into data. If the data is curated well enough, then you start getting secondary requests that are only relevant to the data. Good, so what do we do about this? As an agency, we have some projects that are, let's say, flagship projects that we keep investing in them over a period of years. The first one is the mutagraphs of cancer, the mutagenic signatures of cancer. So I don't expect you to read all the little letters, but what we can see is we can take a slice of different stratified populations and then sequence those for the occurrence of cancer, just to try to find out what the driver genomic signature is for cancer development. And we've done a lot of genomes. You can see over 5,000 genomes for different cancer types. And we can start seeing similarities. People with the same exposures have the same genomic signature that appears time and again. And now we're in the second phase of this project. From 5,000 cases, well annotated cases, we'll move to 30,000 annotated cases by the end of 28. We'll probably extend it even further because the more you look, the more you find in this respect. But how does it help in the guidelines? Because you remember we have to go towards guidelines. For example, in aristolochic acid exposure. So this is an acid that is through the exposure to this plant that is used primarily in traditional Chinese medicine. If the plant is not prepared in the right way, then instead of having a beneficial effect, it has a detrimental effect. And we can go back to the library, to our biobank from across the world, and say, for this type of cancer, can we see this signature? And which countries do we see this signature? In this case, because we found it in Southeast Asia and particularly in China, we immediately knew it had to do something with the traditional Chinese medicine at that level of population, and then we can produce the guideline that relates to the use. Slightly different examples. So these are a couple of examples that come out of my lab. We can also bring together the data from different cohorts and the samples from different cohorts across the world to do a separate investigation. So in this case, we got about 8,000, well, just over 8,000 samples from different cohorts for colorectal cancer together with the microbiome data to see the relative change in the microbiome over the course of colorectal cancer development. Slightly different example, we wanted to implement a recommendation for a diagnostic set, which means we stratified the population using G1s. We identified the population segment that is more likely to benefit from the second implementation of the diagnostic, and we conducted again a series of validations using our samples from the Bible. So these are the type of work that we do. It's not discovery science per se, it's always with a focus on a recommendation at the end of the road. Now, we're very acutely aware that we're missing the representation from many parts of the world. And this is problematic because actually, if you look at the genetic diversity, these are the areas that we're missing the most. So it's really counterproductive when it comes to the type of work that we do. So for the last 10 years, we've created a network of biobanks and population cohorts. So this is an institutional network. There is no money involved. It's free to join. But what we do is we provide the updated SOPs, the training where necessary to harmonize as much as possible the collection of samples and data. Because it means when the opportunity arises for us to work together, it's very easy to incorporate these partner institutions into the multinational work. So, for example, when COVID came and Birendra was part of this work, we asked all these different institutions, what is the experience, how have your SOPs changed? And within 6 months, we had a special issue in biopreservation and biobanking, and it was actually fully funded by the NIH Center for Global Health. I don't think they would do it this year, but they did it then, and it was a very effective use of the network. What else do we do with the network? We try to identify the knowledge gaps and priorities. So before the pandemic, we did the very usual series of repeating the same validated questionnaires every 5 years to see if the gaps have changed. After doing it for 20 years, the gaps don't change. They're usually funding, regulatory. There are no surprises there. What we've done post-pandemic, though, is we try to get some improved granularity. So we used the Lancet Oncology Commission 2 years ago, 3 years ago, as an excuse to run another series of questionnaires to get a bit more granularity. So, for example, when we say there is a gap in the leadership and coordination systems, what does it mean? It means that we don't have dedicated courses for medical leadership. People find themselves in the position of leadership, and they either have the skills to do it or not. But there is nobody trained to be a leader. And that's particularly problematic because literature has shown time and again that in clinical positions, the leaders that have a clinical background outperform those that don't. So it's very clear that you have to have the leadership to help these people reach those positions fully prepared. Anyway, going off topic, but you can see how you can get the granularity that you need so you can start having some actions. At the same time, we did the same for infectious disease biobanks in low middle income settings. This was together with the Egyptians, and again, we started breaking down what does it mean? What does it mean to not have equipment? It's not that you don't have equipment, you usually have equipment, but it's legacy equipment that's been already gone through the ringer twice, and you have to deal with it. So it's good to get to that level. That starts to become actionable. So if you ask me what type of samples we have in low middle income settings, I think I have the confidence to say that I know what to expect. We would expect about a third to be blood and blood derivatives, about a third of it to be FFP slides, and about another third to be DNA or RNA samples. That's a pattern that we see consistently across low middle income countries. Now the problem we have is we don't have a consistent view of what data these samples come with. And more importantly, there is no study that can tell us what's the quality of the data that these samples come with. So we have a problem we try to address, but it's not going to be an easy one to crack. So are the regulators aware for the digitalization? The answer is yes. But actually, if we don't have these granular objectives, they cannot do very much. So in 2020, as part of the G20 summit in Saudi Arabia, Saudi had the presidency at that point, the health ministers convened, and for the first time there was a declaration of digital health with 9 principles. And you can see there are some high-level principles that digital health is a right, much like any other right in health, and it needs to be equally distributed, etc., etc. Very high-level principles, but at least there was consensus at the highest level. 2 years later, in 2022, Indonesia had the G20 presidency, and we started breaking down these high-level principles into something that is closer to the ground. So when we talk about digital health, what do we talk? It's about equal access to technology, equal access to infrastructure, that sort of thing. Again, still high level, but a little bit more decoded, that you can start deriving programs to do funding for these specific points. Also, as part of the G20, we wrote, together with a number of colleagues, the Building Back Better policy brief, so giving the advice on how the labs and the laboratory infrastructure should be reconstructed following the pandemic. If I was to summarize it, is we asked for more redundancy in the system, because what we see is that the moment you have a disruptive event, working at capacity is really counterproductive. Of course, in LMICs, that's wishful thinking to have redundancy in the system, but we have to convince the governments that they need to do more. So the more we saw the need, the more they're forced to open their hands. So what does the biobanking look like in Southeast Asia? So as part of the ASEAN Health Secretariat work, we mapped the biobanking activities in the ASEAN member countries. They're all here in the neighborhood, and some of them presented, some of the countries presented yesterday. But what we find mostly, I would say maybe 80%, is this customized activity. So biobanks are set up for either a specific project or a specific hospital. Things are very customized. Now, this is a bit problematic for us because it means when you customize things, yes, you ensure the sustainability. The danger you have is you can over-customize and then you become irrelevant technology. So that's what we see mostly in Southeast Asia, and it means that what we need to do now is these centers of excellence. They need to be incentivized in some way to connect, to start doing collaborative work together, so that these increases the sustainability and reduces this danger of over-customization. Because if you have multiple partners, they pull you back. You cannot go to over-customize. So last year in May, we had also an agreement signed by Lao PDR hosting the ASEAN member states, where there was an agreement on high level for biobanking for the first time. And they agreed in the regional collaboration for sample and data sharing. They said they don't want to do it unless there is adequate training and capacity. So first we address the training and capacity, and then they're happy to do the sharing. And it includes not just the samples, but information sharing and the analytics. But it has to be complementary to existing structures, and it has to have an element of innovation. And that innovation really, we can summarize in AI. There is not a lot of innovation other than using the data to feed into AI models that are specific to the populations. The single biggest question that came along all of these countries was the protection of the intellectual interest. And I think until we satisfy this question on IP protection, we'll be stuck for some time. So if we were to summarize, 25 years ago in the ASEAN member states, there was very low level of activity. So on the one axis is the level of activity, on the other axis is the level of regulation. You can see it was towards the starting point. And you can see 10 years in 2010, they started moving, regulation going up, activity going up. 2020, so we're moving in the right direction. I think that's the general positive message. We don't see fragmentation forces in the field. It's moving in the right direction. It's just the speed, it's very different from place to place. So what are the future steps or the future that we envisage? It's an increased focus on ethics and IP. So once we sort the IP, we will see a wave of AI implementation. And then the question will be very quickly the ethical one, because you can do it, does it mean you should do it? And I think it would be good, at least in some way, to preempt these ethical questions now until the regulators sort out the IP work. The second is that we should expect for biobanks to satisfy multiple projects. So what we collect in terms of samples and data will be assorted and reassorted for secondary use, especially the data. So we should be prepared for requests to satisfy just data access. You shouldn't think that WHO has done this for years now. We're only getting the contracts finalized last year for secondary data access. So it's something that we had to face. And we said for a while, we don't know if it's a trend, so we'll do it ad hoc. But then it happened again and again, so we had to put the system in place. So we can say this is the way things are going. And from our perspective, we turn this research into an educational resource. So in 2022, we relaunched the Global Laboratory Leadership Program. And this year in May, we're launching the Managing Healthcare Research Infrastructures module at the WHO Academy. We have little bits and pieces always on the IARC learning pages, on the Academy learning pages. These are all free to access. The courses obviously take a bit longer. That's why the course will only be released this year. But all the knowledge we try to distill and make available as much as possible. Also, the minimum standards that we had as a technical publication fed into the ISBE best practices. The ISBE best practices fed into the ISO standard. We've seen some of these courses created for biobanking. And in the last few years, we started consolidate the knowledge from low middle income partners into books. I know these books will be in 5 years' time, they will be surpassed. That's fine. But we want the knowledge to be in one place, to have reference points, even if it means 5 years from now, we have to revisit them. Again, these are open access. So for example, the book that we published last year on digitalization of healthcare, yeah, it is by Springer, but we got the funding to make it open access. And we continue in this direction. I would absolutely invite those who are interested to contact me, because we always have things running on the background, and we would very much welcome contributions from India. So in conclusion, what we see a very strong demand for high quality samples that continues globally. And the numbers are usually requested for the National Genome Project. The biobanking landscape in the ASEAN region is highly fragmented. And this is not a surprise. We have a good historical understanding as to why this is, but it doesn't mean it's efficient. We have to acknowledge how we are and where we want to go. The majority of the countries have introduced a set of regulations and guidelines, but the majority of the regulatory landscape, even though it's got increased, it needs further optimization and development. So, for example, India has a very mature regulatory landscape for India, but it doesn't take into account international collaboration as much as it should. So that's what I mean by optimization. And that's a pattern that we see repeated in other countries. So, for example, Vietnam is exactly the same. The law is very good for Vietnam, no doubt about it, and they designed it in this way, but they didn't take the international collaboration into account as much as they should have. The key consideration remains the protection of IP. And while we have overarching agreements regionally, we don't expect to see a global agreement to be reached. So what we predict is we will see these regional hubs. For example, India is a major regional hub. It will continue to be a major regional hub. It's not going to be a global agreement that is reached, which is fine. That's the way things are. With this, I'll say thank you for your attention, and of course, you're more than welcome to reach me. LinkedIn is the preferred method because I travel a lot, but you can email me too. Thank you. Yes, for business. So we try to make it as easy as possible. What we say, we don't want individuals to participate, but institutions. So as an individual, you need to get institutional approval to participate. So that's about it. So from that point, we just require the data and contact details, and there is no funding and no money involved. Just become part of the network. The benefit from the participants is that we mention all of the calls that are active and running. So if you see an interest, then just feel free to say, oh, yeah, I'm interested in this, I will participate. So what we do is we mention all the other institutions. So you can see them on the map and you can see a list, but we're not allowed by law to give the contact details. So for that, you would have to request to us. So we mediate for contact details. But you can see who's there. Yes, so I think for well, there are many answers we can go down. So business, I think at the moment for India would be a very good vehicle to complement the training that's taking place. So I don't want to do it alone. It looks very bad and it feels not right. If I come here and say this is how you should do things, I have to work with an Indian partner so that we get something that's actually right for India. So I think complementing the training would be one way. The other is to find a way to do collaborative projects. Another regulation is tight. So I don't think the discussions have developed enough as to how we can incorporate Indian colleagues into the international work that we do. Yes, yes. Yeah, we have a number of strategies. So for population level, we don't ask individual characteristics. So for population level data sharing, I think it's easier there. We just use the aggregate data. For specific cohorts, often we need to know the individual identifiable details. So for example, we're running a few studies internationally in villages next to open mining that are exposed to heavy metals and the level of the type of cancers they get. And then we need to have the location of the house where they are, and that makes them absolutely identifiable. We tend to separate it, and then one piece of the data is always, it's never online, ever. So we would go and get the data as required, and then once we have the data combined, we will only use it in a safe sandbox in the cloud. So we create a safe space on the cloud where the data will be uploaded, You can use it to do the analytics. You can download the analytic results, but you cannot download the data. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we're thinking about other solutions like blockchain, but I don't think we're well advanced in that. Yes. Yes, the boss said enough. No, he says no. Look at him with a smile, but he said no. Yes. Hmm. Yes, 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 yes. So we came up across the same problem. So the question is about the data once you collect them for the primary purpose and the consent is there for the primary purpose. How do you use it for a secondary use for data? Yeah, we came across this problem many times for our older collections. And the guidance we had from the legal system was to make the work as visible as possible. So we always put on our website, this is a new study, it's going to use data from such and such and such collection. And prove that reaching the population for a second consent is not practicable. So we do some pilots to say, we choose 100 participants, we phone them up. If 50 of them have moved, the cost is not realistic. So we say we've tried, we can demonstrate for legal reasons that we tried. We've made it as public as possible. So if somebody wants to remove the data, they can contact us and do so. But then we have to release the data because the scientific question and the benefit from the scientific question is higher level than the individual request. So that's how we work. Yes, yes. So we have a data protection officer. So one of the legal team, it's not a full-time job, but one of the legal team has been trained specifically for data and data agreements, and they operate as the data protection officer. Thank you. Yes. Oh yes, I'm trying to get the stick out. Yes.
Now we can get on with our next talk by Dr. Singh. So we welcome Dr. Singh and it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Singh, who is a senior principal scientist and head of the Bharatiya Research WMD Indian
the TSIR National Citizen Database. This division focuses on developing and certifying Indian reference materials that are traceable to the international systems of India. He has worked extensively on the development and characterization of materials, particularly in the area of nanomaterials and advanced materials that can be applied across various industrial and scientific fields, including healthcare. Dr. Singh has an extensive publication record with over 20,000 citations in the field of material science and engineering, nanomaterials, biosensors, and nanomedicine. Dr. Singh's work is pivotal in advancing India's metrology capabilities and bridging the gap between national and international measurement standards. His research
more than enough. So please.
It's a learning for us, Doctor.
Thank you, Chairman, for such a nice introduction. And good morning, everyone. So we had a wonderful previous talk, and my talk is little bit, on a certain other angle of this biobanking, which is metrology, which is a measurement science, standardization and measurements. So I'm involved in the development of certified reference material which are being used for testing and calibration services. So my talk is designed like I will go through some kind of how we have a quality infrastructure in some country and what CSI National Physical Laboratory do in our country, and then biobanking and standardization part. So quality infrastructure of any country actually divided into two. There are two important pillars. One is standard maintaining organization, which is BIS, Bureau of Indian Standards. It's like ISO, International Standard Organization, and then NMI of any country. NMI, so CSI or NPL is NMI by the act of the parliament in our country, right? This core data is so we are giving the capability of our measurement and the precision of any constant, physical constant, which we can measure, is always enlisted in this core data, which is a committee on data run by International Science Council. And then comes the accreditation body, which there are Quality Control of Quality Council of India, which has NABL, National Accreditation Board for Laboratories, NABH, National Accreditation Board for Hospitals. So all of them, they comes under QCI, and QCI is a part of DPIIT, which is Department of this internal and this internal trades basically in our country. And the QAI, these are four other these accreditation bodies came up recently. Quality Assurance of India is QAI, IQAS, and FODAS. So now we have, I think, 4 or 5 accreditation laboratories in our country. Then these accreditation laboratories, they give the certification to the different bodies, and on the basis of the certification, then they issue the certificates to the enterprises. And when we are having this calibration laboratories directly go through the national accreditation body or through the NMI of the country, right? So in that way, means there are one direct linkage. However, the highest confidence we get in the measurement we get from the National Measurement Institute, which is NPL, right? So NPL is National Measurement Institute by the Act of Parliament. So we are having different divisions in there, and we have been established before independence of this country. So the broad objective of CSIR is to develop, maintain measurements and calibration standards that are internationally accepted at par with other NMIs, National Metrology Institute of the world, to offer metrology service to the industry and legal metrology. For example, this is the reference material which we produce and we serve our country.
and this is the reference material for the calibration of scanning electron microscope, which we have developed at our laboratory. This is a gas diffusion layer, which has been used for developing indigenous this fuel cell by National Chemical Laboratory, Pune. So these are different kind of activities we are involved in, and we are taking care of physico-mechanical metrology, electrical electronics, environmental science, and biomedical metrology. Biomedical metrology recently been started in 2018, and advanced material and device metrology, which I am looking about, and then Indian Standard Time. But for example, how many of you know that NPL is disseminating the time to our country, and we have a capability of measuring 10 raised to the power minus 9 seconds, right? So this kind of accuracy we have at CSI and NPL. So if we go for the how we are saying that we are at par with the international standards, this is the Meter Convention, which has been held in 1875 in Paris, and they have General Conference of Weights and Measures, and then we have CIPM, which is International Committee of Weights and Measures. Then CIPM defines different consultative committees for different parameters. So you can see acoustic, ultrasound, electricity, and then comes the QM, which is amount of substance, metrology, and chemistry, and biology. So the metrology biology is quite young as compared to the other metrological programs. And then we have these regional metrological organization. So we fall in Asia Pacific Metrology Program, which is the APMP through the BIPM. And this APMP again has different technical committees. For example, in materials, we have TCMM. For chemistry, we have TCQM. So we are having, recently we had this meeting of BIPM at NPL. So continuously, we are maintaining our capabilities at par with the international standard, and this is where the traceability to SI unit goes to this BIPM, right? So this is the traceability chain. So any kind of measurement which you want, right? It has to go through from SI, which is kept at this BIPM, and then the National Measurement Institute. Then we have regional research laboratories and NABL accredited laboratories who provides the testing and calibration certificates to other laboratories, right? And after that, everything comes to the working standard and to the market. So this is how we maintain the quality. If this particular chain is not maintained, then we cannot have the barrier-free trades, right? For example, in India, what we have, we go to buy some kind of vegetables, and the person is giving with some stone, right? And that stone, you don't know when it became from 1 kg to 700 gram, right? So, but we are paying for 1 kg. If we have million tons of our grain exported or imported, and you have an uncertainty of even 2 grams, how you are escalating this and how much money is involved in there. So this is the importance of measurement basically, and it is important everywhere. So the Lord Kelvin very clearly said, if you cannot convert your knowledge into the number, your knowledge is either of measure kind or incomplete. So that's where comes the origin of metrology, right? That we are converting all our knowledge into the numbers and why they are important for long-term stable measurements. And this will give you this is a very important parameter which you have to consider for your biobanking, because you are having long-term storage. So the stable measurement has to be there. Comparable measurements means there should not be variation from one biobank to another biobank in the data. Coherent measurements. So the international system of units ensure the international parity in reporting, calibration, testing results. However, so if I give another, like for barrier-free trades, what you need, This is NMIs, NMI of India or NMI of any ex-country. Both of them are CIPM MRA signatory, mutual recognition agreement. So CIPM I already explained. Then you have this testing laboratory and this BIS or ISO standard. Now here comes that we should have our own standard because our environmental conditions are different. So we should have our own standard which are being kept at the Bureau of Indian Standards. Either we follow the ISO or we adopt those ISO standard as it is and we convert it into the IS. Or if we work together to develop new standard, for example, recently NPL has developed some ISO standard for ferrofluids, right? And that has been internationally accepted. But it takes a long time to develop those kind of standards where academia, industry, and the NMI has to work in a close collaboration. So then you have ILAC MRA. These ILAC MRA signatory, all these NABL accreditation, NABL and QAI, all of them are ILAC MRA signatory, and they are following the ISO standard. On that basis, they are giving you the accreditation, and then this certification body is basically certifying your products and services. So this is how a quality assurance program of any country is maintained. So this is just an example. Now, we come to the methodology. For us, in physical world, the methodology is very simple, and it becomes more complicated in chemical world, right? For example, if I need to measure a length, I can easily measure, right? If I want to measure a concentration of lead, the concentration of lead, method of measuring concentration of lead in seawater, in fish, in tissue, everywhere, you have a different measurement procedure because here comes the effect of matrix, which is more complex. So that's how now how to do, because whenever you are measuring something, it has to come to the amount of substance. Right? So calcium is there in this particular tissue, but the measurement is different. So what we can do, we can produce some kind of a reference standards which has predefined set of values. So that if direct calibration of equipment is not possible, reference material, certified reference material are required often in chemical and biological methodology. This is where we have our role. So the certified reference materials are well characterized substance for one or more specific properties, accompanied by certificate that provide the value, specific property, its associated uncertainty, and statement of methodological traceability. So using this particular certified reference material, we can go to the barrier free trade requirement. We can ensure the quality of our product, right? Now, this is one of the example. Recently, we have started developing for the cement, and we are now exporting all this reference material to these countries like Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc., and Middle East and Europe. And this is another example of the water reference material. Can you imagine? We have stocked around a 35 crore a year, the import of reference material which we were importing for characterizing our water testing equipment, or the CRMs used by the water testing laboratory. So for a year they use like around 90 crores, so 35 crores we have already stocked. This is the development of last 5 years only. Now, from here, giving this particular example of the importance of methodology, now I move to the biobanking. So since yesterday, you people have listened a lot about biobanking, so I'm not giving more this introduction. So biobank is basically a repository that stores biological samples, right? So why you need this? Advanced personalized medicines, treatment strategies, large-scale data collection, analysis of genomic, epidemiology, and drug development. This is where your biobanks are providing services, right? However, this is not related to only human, but it can be used for the animals, plants, soils, everywhere you have those biological systems, for example, microorganism in the soil, or some kind of microbiota of soil, plant microbes, or tissues in the plant. So you can have all those repositories and then can provide this to R&D services, academia, or hospitals, or wherever they are required. Now, all these things is still our quality management system, ethic and legal compliance process and measurements are still weak. So this is where we have to work together. And for this, so challenges in there, like we have to optimize the processes. Our protocol SOPs have to be well optimized. Now, different temperatures, time and collection. This can result into the inconsistency. For example, you people are from the medical science, can easily understand a simple example of this when you are storing the blood, freezing blood and thawing blood, thaw blood, right? You can, when you're thawing your blood, but the lysing of the RBCs is possible. So this particular process has to be optimized, and standard operating procedures has to be well defined. Now, so the need for standardization is consistency across biobanks, reproducibility, and a global collaboration is required. But if you require global collaboration, then global SOPs are required. And how the global SOPs are coming to you through the standards. For example, ISO standard or Indian standards, right? So standardization allows researchers to replicate studies and validate findings, which is essential for scientific progress. Now, key areas of standardization, as I mentioned before, if you are having this SOPs, then SOP at different stages, these SOPs are required. For example, when you're collecting, how you're collecting the sample, how you're processing the sample, and then how you are storing the sample. So everywhere, all those SOPs are required. Sample processing protocols, they have to ensure the uniformity. For example, centrifugation. I know the one thing, I can give one example. When I joined in NPL, I have been asked to develop this nanoscience center at Allahabad University. I went there. When I went there, they gave me the zinc acetate, they gave me the ethanol, they gave me the lithium hydroxide, which are required to synthesize the zinc oxide nanoparticles, right? I was trying to make them, which I can synthesize with my blind eyes, but I was not able to synthesize them. And for me, it was really like embarrassing. Then I asked, okay, I want this precursor from Sigma Eldritch, or this, another was this Acer, right? Not Acer. This was another Fisher Scientific, yeah. So then they bought from the Sigma Eldritch. In one go, I have synthesized 5 nanometer zinc oxide nanoparticles. Even Preeti sitting here, she went to my lab one day, and within 1 day she understand how come. Because those precursors what I was using, they were well certified. Although this was zinc acetate, but the purity was not the same. So this is where these standards play a very important role. So biobanking standard development, recently in 2018, biobanks have adopted this ISO 20387. However, in I think somehow my slides have been swept. Yes, this is not the presentation that I was sharing. But anyways, so what you have: functions, activity, and guiding principles, right? In functions, you have collecting process, storing and maintaining, and distribution. Now, what are the guiding principles? Technical competence, quality management, and requirements. So in that case, you need two different series of ISO standard 9000 series, which is related to the general management, and then you need 17,000 series, which is for your technical competency, which define the technical competency. However, in 17025, there are different, it defines like in biology, in physics, in chemistry, there are different other, sub, how to say, let me, subcategories, you can say, right? Subcategories for different areas. Now, if I'm talking about biobanking, biobanking has your testing in there, your storing in there, your all the storage equipment has to be calibrated. They have to be calibrated through 17025, right? If you want to use the certified reference material, then you need to have 17034. Not exactly in the biobanking, but when you are purchasing those certified reference material, that particular company has to be 17034 accredited, right? Or the certificate of analysis has to be associated with the product, right? Then again, so now still we have a lot of rules to identify the gaps. For example, now I was asking the question of data protection. Then digital metrology comes into play, but still we don't have any ISO standard for digital metrology. Right now, only PTB Germany and NIST USA and NPL UK. These three people are working on the digital metrology. So this ISO 20387, what it gives, we have to write 20387.2018. The self-declaration of conformity. If your lab is being accredited, I think there are few biobanks have been accredited by QAI. And the first biobank, Birendra told me in the morning that their biobank in Medanta has been accredited by QAI for this ISO 20387. NABL has also started accreditation for this, and they have recently, in last September, accredited one of the biobank. Then conformity assessment by an independent second party. This can be used as a tool for attestation at all three levels of conformity assessment. Now, so now we have at least one standard for our quality check in the biobanks, but still we have to develop different other parameters and which can be taken care by another ISO document, or we can participate together to develop different standard documents. So this is one of the example of European FP7 project funded from there. So you can see they have produced tools, methods, and data harmonization, standardization, data sharing, and analysis across multiple biobank database. So, but however, 9 countries and 7 institutes were involved in this particular project. And this is what is missing in our Indian continent, and which we have to start. So biobanking, as one of the statement of Zisis was there, that the laws and regulation of biobanking are evolving over time, and it becomes important biobanks to regularly check their compliance. I think I'm running out of my time, or so I can have 5 more minutes, right? Yeah. So in the time of growing emphasis on data privacy, biobanks should uphold the highest standard for data privacy and have to follow sample management best practices. Adhering to a variety of international standards, this is what I was trying to say for the biobank, that different standards we have to follow in the biobank. For example, ISO 20387, GDPR, HIPAA, 21 CFR Part 11, SAP accreditation. All these accreditations are required for the biobanks, right? So laboratory information management system can enhance the streamlining streamline the data management, enhancing sample tracking, management, informed consent of donors, thus fostering trust donors and research partners. For example, you can see if so, still a lot of things are required for the standardization of biobanks. So this is your different the 21 CFR Code of Federal Regulations, Code of Federal Regulations 46.116. So all these accreditations are required. So in summary, I would like to say standardization is crucial for success of biobanks in ensuring quality, comparability, and reproducibility in research. As you can see, that different lot of components are required in here, so we need to have a hand-holding together to develop the new standards. So researchers, biobank managers, and policymakers should work together to create and adopt standardized procedures that will derive advancement in science and healthcare. So with this, I would like to stop here. Thanks.
The biobank which we get the ISO certification, that was not Vedanta, that was ILBS.
Oh, ILBS. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. And it is a nice presentation, and it is a unique presentation. Yeah. And standardization is required for the biobanks. And I think that if we suppose that biobank is a car, so car need a mechanic, and mechanics and also car need the fuel, and fuel would be the manpower. And as per my experience for the 15 years in the biobanking field, even the funding agency is considering biobank as a project.
Right.
But that is not a project, that is infrastructure development. That is a recent example of the ILBS, that is huge funded by the government agencies, and they consider that biobank as a project, and after 5 years they don't care that they have funded the crore of the money, multiple crore, and they don't care that who will run that biobank. So if there is no fuel, then there is no standardization and these things. And I'm very sad that I got the first biobank in India and third one in the ASEAN to take the ISO 20387 when it launched, and they didn't renew because they don't have the fuel, means they don't have the driver who will run that biobank.
I could understand that very well because it took me a lot of time to convince people, right, that we have the NMI and we have equal status of NIST or PTB Germany. We can develop those indigenous standards at our own country. For example, what you are saying, like if we go for the BIS, so there are some regulatory authorities. So we are in different pockets. I'm continuously talking to Ministry of Consumer Affairs, I'm talking to Ministry of Commerce, right, to bring them together, and now they are reviving we are having national test houses, right, and NTH, now we are reviving NTH with a new vigor of this, putting this standardization in place. And now this word of metrology for the first time is reverberating in PMO through PCI. So every time, even our PM is continuously forcing and emphasizing that no, we need the standards, we need the standards. So we are trying this to talk to these government agencies for like funding in standardization, more funding in standardization.
Recently, the wanted to establish the reference ranges
Right.
for our samples. We have these ranges for defining anemias and leukemias, which are all based upon standards which we have inherited from the international. Whereas no large population-based studies have been done in the country itself. So I think one of the important trust factors for the GOI right now is also to look at our own reference standards to define our own.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Singh, that was a wonderful talk, brought out the importance of standardization and the role of metrology and measurements goes unsaid, and new understanding into Indian reference material development that you all are doing, because till now in pathology labs, we have very established reference materials, but they are all imported. So I'm so happy to, funding is always a crunch, and this is really an insight into what we are looking for, indigenous development, and I think this will go a long way in supporting biobanks. As Viren very rightly said, Dr. Viren said, it's not a project, it's a long-term commitment. And we need to sustain our standards, year on, by accreditation and other means. So thank you very much for giving that insight. With that, we close this session. And we can continue with the next. Thank you so much, Dr.
So thank you both the speakers, Dr. Singh and Dr. Zisis. So I would request now both the speakers to come on dais for felicitation. And I would request my chairpersons kindly honor our speakers. Dr. Birendra, Yadav to kindly join. Okay, huge round of applause because Dr. Zisis has been a central figure for our conference. Thank you, Dr. Zisis. So I would request Dr. S.P. Singh to kindly come on live. I would request Dr. Tulika, Assistant Professor JMU, SCNSC and AIRF to kindly come on dais to felicitate our chair speakers, chair session person. Dr. Birendra, please. So please. So we will have a quick tea break, and after 10 minutes we are going to rejoin. And there is a poster, exhibition outside, poster presentations of the students who have really worked hard. So kindly have a look while having the tea. Thank you so much.